Welcome back to the Great.com Talks with podcast. And today we have a special episode. For you who don't recognize me, I've only done like 3 episodes of this podcast. And that's when I am particularly curious about the guests, because I'm Eric Bergman. I'm the founder of Great.com. And today we're talking with TerraPraxis, which is an organization that I've personally been donating money to several times without actually knowing much about them. So when our paths crossed and do a podcast interview, I was like, I want to do that. I want to talk to these guys. So the reason why I got in contact with TerraPraxis was through Founders Pledge, who also been a guest on this podcast before. And I asked them for recommendations. What are the best organizations to donate money to right now? And they gave me a list of 13 organizations. And about TerraPraxis, they wrote, just briefly, TerraPraxis advocates for the inclusion of nuclear power in the climate solution. The problem they are trying to solve is that there are researchers and advocates for the expansion of energy innovation with particular focus on advanced nuclear power in Europe and North America. And why Founders Pledge is impressed, and this is the good part. TerraPraxis is recommended largely on the basis of its co-founder, Kirsty Gogan, who is an astonishingly impressive nuclear power advocate. And that's it.
Wow.
This is the full pitch I got.
So you're starting off by making me feel incredibly bashful.
That's wonderful. So when I got an opportunity of talking to you, obviously I wanted to jump on that opportunity because I know very little about TerraPraxis. I actually haven't done much research. I've just trusted Founders Pledge and I want to learn more. So that's why we are here. At least that's why I am here.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I mean, you're a very unusual person for being genuinely so curious and interested in this topic. So congratulations for that and thank you for that, because the reason that I'm like advocating for nuclear energy is because, well, for a bunch of reasons, but fundamentally because I'm a climate hawk and I'm really worried that about the need for us to diversify our strategies, and nuclear energy has been very neglected in the whole climate discourse. And I guess Founders Pledge found me before, advocating for nuclear energy kind of before it was fashionable. But now it really is becoming more fashionable, and there are lots of incredible advocates out there these days. So I'm really happy to have been at the vanguard of that. But, I think the movement is growing, and that's a very exciting place to be.
That's wonderful to hear. So just for people who don't even know what it means to be an advocate for nuclear energy, what is it that you actually do?
Yeah, so well, I said as an environmentalist, I'm interested in nuclear energy as a climate solution because for those of you that don't know, uranium, which of course is the kind of fuel for nuclear energy, is 1 million times more dense than coal. And what that means is that you create a just astonishingly large amount of energy with a very tiny environmental footprint. And that means across the whole life cycle, so all the way from mining through to the end of the life of the operating plant, you have the greenest energy source available in terms of every kind of metric that you care to imagine: water use, land use, resource use, mining. The waste streams actually are tiny compared to any other source of energy. And that really matters when you're looking for emissions-free energy sources that can power whole civilizations and grow access to energy around the world. Just to give you an idea, we need to probably double or triple our global energy infrastructure in order to meet rising global energy demand, in order to, give people around the world, billions of people, the safety and security that we enjoy through having access to abundant, reliable, and affordable energy. And there really isn't, any other option available to us to supply that kind of civilization scale energy and protect nature at the same time.
So what you're doing is basically spreading the knowledge of nuclear energy as the most green or the most reliable and efficient energy source out there, which is a difficult task to do because there is so many preconceived notions about nuclear power plants, which I'm
Yeah,
struggling with as well. Like whenever I'm
right.
trying to talk to anyone about nuclear, they're like, I'm like, but it's not all bad. Like it's a lot of good things.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a kind of a vacuum, and you know, a lot of misinformation and a lot of misconceptions or preconceptions about nuclear energy that I shared myself. I mean, I was spent my entire career as an environmental activist, and if you told me 10 years ago you're going to be like, banging the drum for nuclear energy, that I would not have believed you. But I started to look at, the realities of the kind of scale of energy infrastructure that we need to build in order to completely transition our whole economy from fossil fuels, not just the electricity sector, but everything else, the other 80% of energy that we use. And you quickly realize that we can't get all the way there just with wind and solar. The scale of the challenge is just too large. And so I started kind of tentatively like looking at nuclear energy, and I really quickly discovered that almost everything that I thought was true about nuclear turned out to be wrong, basically.
Darn
And
it.
yeah, and I guess it's kind of understandable. Like the mainstream environmental movement grew up out of the peace movement that grew up in response to opposition to nuclear bombs and nuclear bomb testing. Grew up out of the peace movement.
Yeah.
And then kind of made this conflation of nuclear weapons and nuclear energy.
Yeah.
And that's become kind of part of the DNA of the mainstream environmental movement, which then began to sort of increasingly, of course, during the last few decades, focus on climate change. And therefore, nuclear energy has been kind of rejected as one of the solutions to the climate change challenge, because so much of that advocacy around climate has been driven by the mainstream environmental movement.
Yeah.
But actually, I think two things will happen. One is that history will judge the way that we've characterized climate as an environmental issue, when in fact it's a public health issue, it's a risk issue, it's a global security issue, it's a food and water and migration issue. It's going to make our world less secure.
For sure.
That's the the reality, and it's that's how we should be seeing it, as a risk issue. And so history will judge, I think, that failure of our global community to recognize that soon enough and respond accordingly. But the other thing I think, unfortunately, that will happen as we do sort of productize and normalize nuclear technologies, and they become much more widespread, and people just generally have much more contact with nuclear technology and are able to sort of learn from those experiences, that many of the fears that they may have, aren't really justified. Then I think that we will look back and we will judge the anti-nuclear movement for holding us back in our climate emissions reduction progress.
Yeah, for sure. I completely share that view. So let's go back to the word advocates, because it's interesting to me. What does it mean in this context? Is it that you're focusing on talking to politicians? Are you focused on the media? Is there some other way where you're trying to spread this knowledge? What is it that TerraPraxis and you do concretely?
Yeah, well, so we're like incredibly grateful to people like you, and especially to the Founders Pledge for sort of creating a kind of philanthropic opportunity for this kind of work, because the mainstream climate foundations are still very much funding the 99.9% of climate philanthropy is focused on renewables and energy efficiency. And massive progress has been made as a result of that philanthropic support in driving down costs of renewables and increasing rates of deployment and driving awareness about climate and so on. But it's all going in one direction. And as we know, we're not making enough progress on emissions reduction. So we do have to diversify our activities. And and focus on, transferring some of that success to other technologies. And so my focus in my advocacy is really mostly focused on the sort of decision makers that are in some way or other controlling resources. And there's two reasons for that. Firstly, we have ourselves in TerraPraxis very limited resources, so we have to be super targeted for the highest impact outcomes. And secondly, actually, public support has never been higher for nuclear energy. I mean, consistently multiple opinion polls from many, many countries, from the US, from Japan, Korea, Germany even, and across Europe, are showing that the public are really supportive of the idea of new nuclear technologies coming to their countries. And I think what's driving that are, of course, concern about climate change, but also other things like, the recent invasion of Russia, by a Russian invasion of Ukraine, has led to, a recognition that an overdependence on imported gas is a bad idea. But it's also led to, a lot of price volatility that's really impacting people in their businesses and in their homes. So price stability, energy security, affordability, and of course climate, is driving a big appetite for nuclear energy. If I can, I'll just say one other thing about my advocacy, which is that, sometimes my colleagues like to joke that there's only one thing that the nuclear industry is more afraid of than being on a panel with Greenpeace, and that's being on a panel with me. One thing that I am not is, a kind of industry shill, or like I'm such a critique of the nuclear industry itself. And a huge part of my advocacy is actually trying to figure out ways to completely radically transform the way that nuclear technology is delivered, to really make it useful, to really make it, meet the needs that we have in our societies. And so that's a big target of my work as well, is overturning those conventions.
That sounds interesting. Let's come back to that. I just want to touch on the word. You said decision makers, that you're targeting decision makers. Is this then mainly politicians, or who do you refer to as decision makers?
Yeah, I mean, we are not sort of directly lobbying politicians, but we are interested in figuring out institutional change that's needed to enable, an acceleration of the deployment of nuclear technologies. And that requires, really major changes in terms of the financing options that are available for these technologies. Right now, for example, the international development banks, the World Bank and others, have a policy of not funding nuclear technology, despite many developing economies wanting that technology. That's a very outdated position, and it really hasn't encountered enough challenge historically. So that's something that we're really interested in making the case for change. And actually, we are starting to make some real progress, because through TerraPraxis, one of our big programs of work is designing a strategy to repower the global coal fleet with new heat sources, new high temperature heat sources, to supply essentially new clean emissions-free steam to existing coal plants, so you can stop burning coal but continue to use the existing power island, the turbines and so on, keep the jobs, keep the plant operating, keep supplying the energy, but without the emissions. And one of the things that these big multilateral development banks are grappling with is what on earth to do with the global coal fleet. It's the single largest source of global carbon emissions. A vast majority of these plants are very young assets. And guess what? People need the energy. So there's no way that they're just going to get shut down. So we're starting to kind of get a little bit of interest, from these banks, by presenting them, rather than presenting them with a kind of, a straight technology push, like, you should support nuclear energy. It's like that isn't the way that you kind of, will necessarily achieve change. What we're designing for is a solution that responds to a problem that we all share. So we're bringing a solution to the banks for a problem that they otherwise just cannot solve. So that's just one example of.
Okay, so let me see if I understand you correctly. It's complicated. So basically, no, it is a complicated topic. Unfortunately, that's why we have this problem. It's complicated.
Yeah,
yeah.
true.
So let me see. So among other things, you're advocating by talking to the World Banks about how can we fund solutions, either for more nuclear energy or towards how can we change the technology in existing coal plants to switch from the, I call it standard coal plants, because I don't really know much about coal plants, to a new and much more efficient, as well as less emission coal technology. So that's something.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you clarified, because I didn't explain it very well. So right now, the global coal fleet, what happens is that you burn coal.
And when you say coal fleet, you mean all the coal power plants?
All the global coal plants. There's a big variety of them, but they all have this in common, which is that you burn coal essentially to make heat in order to make steam, and then the steam turns the turbine and you make electricity. That's it. So a giant kettle, some people would say. Well, the interesting thing about the new nuclear technologies is that they also make heat.
Okay.
So what we're proposing to do is to design a system where you can plonk a new heat source, like a small modular reactor, next to an existing coal plant, supply heat to the existing coal plant, and then you're no longer burning coal, you're using the heat from the small modular reactor to make steam, and then you run the steam through the turbine, and you've got nice, clean, emissions-free steam. So you keep using your asset, your workforce can continue having jobs, and the communities have the socioeconomic benefits because the plant keeps operating, but you no longer burn coal.
Wow. So let me see if I understand it correctly now. It's good that we're putting this ball back and forward a few times.
Yeah.
So basically, you are advocating for a technology where you very easily explained turn coal plants into nuclear power plants instead, but like a much smaller nuclear technology that generates the heat, that runs the steam, that then basically the heat comes from the nuclear rather than from the coal.
Exactly.
So you get emission zero, but using the same staff, the same big plant, the same, well, not everything, but a lot of it.
A lot of it, exactly. And importantly, the transmission as well. So the transmission is, of course, it's already there because it's already connected up to the grid.
Yeah.
And so, this is a kind of at the core of what TerraPraxis is sort of founded to do, which is to figure out, where are the really big problems, where are the really big challenges in our decarbonization and energy access, and how do we design to meet the scale of that need. So there's 2 terawatts of coal currently operating that's about 2,400 coal plants around the world today. If they keep operating, which, as I say, they're very likely to do, we're still building more new coal plants every year. If that coal continues to operate, that just the coal fleet on its own will swallow up our remaining carbon budget for 2 degrees. And there's a lot of other sources of carbon out there as well. So this is a really big challenge that we face if we care about climate. And TerraPraxis is designing a solution for that big challenge, firstly. So we're designing a way of delivering these small modular reactors in a way that can be very standardized, despite the big range of sites and the variety of sites and plants that are out there in the global fleet. And then we're organizing and mobilizing coalitions of delivery partners that can help us actually implement that vision. Because TerraPraxis is a small nonprofit, so we won't be the ones out there repowering these coal plants. But what we're doing is designing a system that could enable other big delivery partners to go out and actually achieve that at the scale that's needed and at the rate that's needed. Because we have, don't forget, 27 years to 2050, right? So
how far along is this solution? Is there any coal plant that actually is using this technology now? And when did that happen, if that's happened?
Yeah, so we've been, over the last sort of 2 years, we've been figuring out, lots of practicalities around how this can be done in a way that's really fast and low cost and very repeatable. And there's, the sort of the product itself, the building system design that we've been working on. And then in addition, we need to transform many other things, like the licensing path to enable this to be deployed into multiple countries as rapidly as possible and without, requiring huge additional costs each time. There's the financing strategy. We need to ensure that, this is really financeable, unlock currently locked finance options. And then there's also the supply chain implications. So we're actually, we've been building a consortium of incredible world-class sustainability leaders like Microsoft, for example, who are working with us on developing digital capability to automate a lot of the pre-development activities that coal plant owners would currently have to go through, that would take them years and hundreds of millions of dollars if they were to do it in the conventional way. So we're working with Microsoft to see how we can apply digital capability, automation, AI, all of those tools to speed that up and compress those schedules and make it really fast and really cheap for those coal plant owners to go through that process. And then we have partners like Schneider Electric and Tractebel and KHNP, like very, very large engineering and design firms that can actually go out and run those feasibility studies with those coal plant owners. And then, yes, we're working with coal plants as well. So we're working with coal plants in Malaysia, in Central and Eastern Europe, in Japan, in the US. So many locations around the world, we're already beginning to interact with these coal plant owners to really sort of understand the practical implications of making this a reality.
That's really cool. So when do you think that this could be up and running? Like, when would the first, because there is currently no coal plant who has done the transition, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Not yet. Well, the other kind of key partners that I didn't mention are, of course, the heat source vendors. So, those companies that are right now commercializing the high temperature heat reactors that would be deployed into this building system. So companies like Seaborg, which they're really interesting. They have a barge-based design. So that would be made in a shipyard and then floated into site. So that would be perfect for all of the coal plants that are next to the water. And then there's X Energy that are developing a high temperature gas reactor, and they're demonstrating their plant right now in the US with Dow Chemical, who are very interested in that, emissions-free steam that I mentioned. And then we have other companies too, like Terrestrial Energy, that are the furthest along in terms of their licensing process. So they've just achieved a big milestone with the Canadian safety regulator. So they're making a lot of progress in the US and in Canada. And then finally, Copenhagen Atomics is another one, which is a super interesting molten salt design that actually uses spent fuel as its fuel. And that's a company coming out of Denmark that are making a fully containerized unit. So it arrives essentially in a sealed kind of shipping container, a box. So, there's all kinds of different companies that are marketing and developing their products right now. And, what we're trying to do is just sort of work in parallel with the commercialization of these technologies, so that in 3 or 4 years, when they're demonstrated and they're coming into the market, we have a really, really large market ready for them, so that we can see these technologies really kind of be deployed to solve some of our like really biggest decarbonization challenges, such as coal.
So what you're trying to do is basically pave the way for this technology, both by solving how can we finance this, because it's shit ton of money that's going to be needed in various ways. How could we solve the like licensing and legal thing? How do we solve the, I assume there is like a chicken and egg situation. Someone needs to build it and there needs to be a demand for it, which is like a tricky situation with these huge investments. And you're basically trying to be the middleman, is not the right word, but someone talking to all these different stakeholders and making sure that it unfolds in a way that it works out.
Yeah, that's a great summary. Thank you. Yeah, it's really well described. And you know, we're doing it because it doesn't exist yet. Okay, and it doesn't exist yet because the nuclear industry hasn't had this kind of historical kind of, you know, mandate to figure out this innovation. You know, one of the interesting things about the existing nuclear plants that we have running already, 400 plants around the world, is that once they're built, they operate for decades.
Yeah.
And the industry is really good at operating them, which is why it's the safest form of electricity generation. You know, despite the 3 accidents, more people die in one single day of normal operations of coal.
Yeah, I know, right? That's so frustrating.
It's coal is so much more dangerous, but it's really normalized, and we just, you know, we're terrible at making assessments of risk as humans.
Yeah, that's wow, that's so frustrating.
But you know, because the plants just operate, you know, so well for so long, the industry hasn't had the culture of innovation and development, the kind of dynamism that we see in other sectors, like in solar and wind, for example, where you've got this, you know, huge teams of people working on project development all the time and constantly like future oriented.
Yeah.
And we haven't had that future orientation in the industry. So there's a kind of a market failure, and that's the gap that TerraPraxis is trying to step into, which is to really sort of define the market requirements for these technologies, really understand what the customers need, you know, in terms of cost and performance, and then figure out ways for the technology to be delivered to meet those requirements, and then organize the market to try to realize that vision. So
yeah,
that's it. That's our small goal, our small ambition.
Yeah. Small goal. Yeah, changing everything.
Yeah.
Let's go to what you mentioned about more people dying in a day from coal than from nuclear in total, because this is something that the vast majority of population is not aware of. The consensus is that nuclear power plants is horrible. Let's not create them. They're really dangerous, and we're not really. I mean, my assumption is that the average person doesn't really think about the dangers of other alternatives. They just don't want nuclear because it sounds really dangerous. Could you just quickly just take us through those numbers a little bit? How many people have actually died from nuclear? Then I know there is no real number, but just rough estimate, and then comparing it to coal, for example, because you said like more people die in a day from coal than in total from nuclear, if I got that correct. Did I?
Yeah, that is correct. Just one normal day of coal kills more people, and that's really before we even take into account air pollution, for example. I mean, you know, we know the World Health Organization estimates, you know, it varies a bit, 7 or 8 million premature deaths per year from air pollution, and that includes indoor and outdoor air pollution, but it's all burning things essentially.
Yeah. But that's air pollution in general, or is that due to just coal?
No, that's the air pollution in general. Yeah. You know, there are stats, like for example in Germany, when the Germans decided to shut down some of their nuclear plants immediately after Fukushima, that research indicates that there's an 1,100 additional premature deaths per year as a result of that decision, because more coal was burned. So, you know, you can see immediately there's a direct correlation in terms of the public health impacts really associated with making a choice essentially between nuclear and coal. And that's fundamentally the choice. Sometimes the choice is presented as nuclear versus renewables, and we definitely don't see it that way. We see nuclear energy being very complementary, enabling really large penetrations of renewables into energy systems. But we haven't yet seen a kind of modern industrialized economy transition entirely just to renewables. What we've seen are some success stories. I don't know if you know, like if you sort of measure climate success in terms of a fully clean electricity grid, like in a zero emissions or very close to zero, less than 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour emissions electricity grid, there's a handful of modern industrialized economies that have achieved that. And it's a fun quiz to sometimes look at. But one of the most recently transitioned economies is Ontario, which, okay, is a bit of a cheat because it's part of Canada, but it's still a big economy. And Ontario was really motivated to shut down its coal plants and expand its nuclear fleet and its renewables as well. Partly because of climate, but mostly because smog days were becoming such a big issue, causing asthma amongst young people, causing, you know, a real sort of material impact on the economy from sick days that people were having to take as a result of air quality. You know, it's really shocking. So that's been completely eliminated now, and they have a completely green grid. Do you know which the other countries are? Shall I tell you?
I'm gonna guess like Luxembourg or someone really small.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think Luxembourg has a super clean grid, but probably depends on a lot of imports as well that they get where they come
Yeah,
from.
that's true.
So the countries are, let's see, okay, so France and Sweden, obviously.
Yeah,
France is like 70% nuclear. France, Sweden, Switzerland, they all have a combination of nuclear and renewables, and
yeah,
that's how they did it. And then Iceland, of course, has geothermal and hydro, and Norway has hydro. So those two countries are very lucky because they have their natural resources.
yeah.
Brazil is another one too. They have a combination of nuclear and renewables.
Brazil?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow. Didn't
yeah,
know that.
yeah. So, and then Ontario. So there are some success stories from a climate perspective. And I think all of those countries, if you think about, you know, Switzerland and Sweden and France, you know, high quality of life,
Yeah.
clean.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to come to the smog. Because like one thing that I think is interesting to just picture is like you mentioned there are 2,400 coal power plants. And when I picture a coal power plant, it's basically the dirtiest thing that can be spewed out in the air. And 2,400 are a lot of them. And all of that filthy air, filthy smoke is being spread out in the air, while in the power plants, sure, there might be toxic things created, but it's not being let out. But all of the well, not all, a lot of the emissions that come from the coal power plants is just freely set out in the air.
Into the air. Yeah.
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 And smog becomes visual. Like one of the big downsides for trying to solve the carbon, the CO2 issue is that it's invisible. It's really hard to sell anyone of doing anything about something that is invisible.
Yeah.
But if you got smog, it's not invisible. Like it's very visible. That's the thing.
Yeah. It's really, it's a wicked problem, climate, because it's happening very slowly. And, you know, one of the things that we learned from COVID, for example, was, you know, I found it amazing how quickly we adapted. I don't know about you, but,
Yeah.
you know, if you told me that we would all be wearing masks and we'd all be like staying 6 feet apart and locked into our houses, I would have been like, what, you know, and we just adapted like incredibly quickly. And humans are great at normalizing things like that. And I was thinking about that and thinking, oh, this is actually really scary how, you know, we are kind of sleepwalking into a, you know, a very climate changed world, because
we
we'll
kind of
be
accept it as
normalizing.
well. Like we're normalizing it. Yeah. Like now the summers are hotter. Like, yeah, that's just not the only problem.
And it just creeps up a little at a time. And, you know, the impacts might be quite extreme in one place at some time, but it might seem quite remote if you're not directly impacted.
Contemporary, like to a large extent, it comes and goes. Like the summer is warmer or whatever, and it just blows over pretty quickly. There is a big storm that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, but it passes.
So what do we do about that? Well, I think we need, okay. I think we need, this is where we need leadership.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was really struck when I was sort of doing my homework, listening to a little bit of your, you know, founding story and everything. And this idea that, you know, we have these choices about, you know, when we see something, do we try to unsee it or pretend we didn't see it, or do we act? And we, you know, that's what leadership is, when you choose to act. And so, you know, with TerraPraxis, we're always trying to find the leaders and mobilize them, and, you know, create opportunities that could actually achieve the change that's needed, and bring them together and inspire more change. And yeah, so that really resonated, that story that you told. I think that's a very inspiring perspective.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so before wrapping this up, I'm just curious to understand a little bit more about TerraPraxis. You mentioned before that you're a small NGO. What does that mean? How many people are you trying to accomplish this? And what is it like that you do on a day-to-day basis?
We are very small, but we're growing, and we're just attracting the kind of most astonishingly incredible people. So, you know, we're able to have, I think, an outsized impact because we have incredibly talented and dedicated people that also come with their own big networks into our organization. So even though our you know, the core team is about 15 people, we're really well connected into a much larger network of, you know, people that share our values and our mission and are helping us to kind of, you know, grow the impact that we have. And we also are supported by an incredible board as well. You know, very eminent, incredible board. So yeah, I mean, we couldn't do what we do without the support of organizations like Founders Pledge. And we, you know, you can see in our annual report, we don't have a big budget, but we are growing. And, you know, we're also growing our partnerships. So, you know, I mentioned that we have a partnership with Microsoft, for example. And last year, we were really honored to sign a strategic framework agreement with the president of Microsoft. You know, it's $1 trillion company. You know? And, you know, Microsoft is helping us in all kinds of ways, because Brad Smith, the president, he was actually the judge of a hackathon that was a company-wide competition that we were participating in. We didn't realize when we were in the competition to build a little tool. It was a beta tool to help coal plant owners evaluate their plants for repowering. And we were doing this little project, and then we found out that we'd won. And, you know, it was kind of incredible. And Brad Smith was the judge. And it was only afterwards that we found out that there were 20,000 teams competing across the company. We were glad that we didn't know that at the time when we were, but it really, like, it caught his imagination.
I just need to stop you there. Like, that's crazy. You're competing
no.
20,000 teams in a hackathon with Microsoft, and you're winning. That's, I mean,
I can't really believe it myself.
There's a break to just celebrate that. I'm very impressed.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, you know, it was really just the beginning. That's the incredible thing. Because, you know, we really caught the imagination of the company that, you know, is sort of has a very ambitious, you know, agenda, not just to be carbon neutral, but carbon negative, and to support its entire global customer base to also decarbonize. You know,
Microsoft has that agenda. Okay.
yeah. So
That's
Microsoft
wonderful.
incredible, really, and they're also gigantic energy users, you know,
I can imagine.
they have tens and tens of gigawatts of, you know, future energy demand that they know they need to meet for all of the data centers that they want to build. You know, the success of AI is only going to contribute to that, you know.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
where's all that energy going to come from? And they
Yeah.
want it to not only be clean, but if it can be carbon negative, then even better. But one thing it has to be is reliable. You know, these data centers need 99.99999% reliability. And so, you know, they're really intrigued by the opportunity to convert these coal plants to clean energy and continue operating them and have very reliable and affordable and clean energy. And they would be good customers for that. So, you know, there's lots of ways that that we can have an outsized impact if we can, you know, forge these great relationships.
That's wonderful. It sounds like Microsoft is the perfect partner to make this happen. And all you needed to do was beat 19,999 teams at a at a hackathon.
Right.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story and telling mainly me more about TerraPraxis, because I was really, really curious. But thank you
Well,
for telling
actually,
everyone
I
else.
want to say one quick thing if I can,
Yeah,
which is
please do.
so my co-founder, Eric Ingersoll, also an Eric.
Wonderful. I like Eric's.
Yeah, he's a good one. You know, he really is the kind of architect of some of these, like, you know, this repowering coal vision. And, you know, we're called TerraPraxis because Terra obviously means earth, but praxis means putting theory into action. And so the partnership that Eric and I have really takes the kind of the genius ideas that Eric, you know, can bring to the party and convert them into action. So that's why, you know, we're such a good team. And I just wanted to give him like that recognition as well, because here I am without him on this interview today.
Thank you, Eric, for magnificent ideas and how to put them into practice. We're celebrating you as well.
Thank you.
What can someone do who wants to support you, Kirsty?
Well, we would love to hear from you if you would like to get involved in what we're doing. If you have ideas for how we can grow our outreach and our impact, and if you'd like to donate, then we would love that too. So, you know, there's many different ways in which we'd love to, you know, continue building our network globally, and you know, we're stronger together. So that's, yeah, you know where to find us. We're on the internet.
That's the good thing about the internet. It's pretty easy to find stuff. At least most things. At least something with the name of TerraPraxis. Then you will find it.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you once again for joining us. I wish you all the best, and I will keep donating, because I probably more now when I know what I'm actually donating towards. And I'll advocate
we'll have
for
more impact. Good.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much, Kirsty. Have a wonderful day and see you soon.